Okay, tonight, we step into an elevator where silence weighs heavier than words, where mirrored walls reflect confusion instead of answers, and where a young woman disappeared into shadow. The doors slide open and shut, but no one emerges. What happened in that confined space is not just a riddle, it is a haunting. Welcome to Criminal Mindcast, the podcast that tells true crime stories through more than evidence. Here we listen to the silence, trace the scars left behind, and explore the psychology of fear, trauma, and mystery. We are not here for spectacle. We are here for the echoes, the things crime never says aloud. Tonight, we face one of the most unsettling mysteries in modern true crime. The case of Elisa Lam and the infamous elevator footage that turned her final moments into legend. Elisa Lam was not a household name before 2013. She was a 21-year-old Canadian student, the daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong. Like many young adults, she carried aspirations of discovery and growth, but beneath her optimism lay the shadows of a fragile mind. Behind her smile, quiet fractures were forming. Her parents operated a modest restaurant in Vancouver. They raised Elisa with the dual pressures of academic achievement and cultural duty. She lived between two worlds, the traditions of her family and the Western call for independence. That balance concealed turbulence, loneliness, and whispers of depression she could not silence. Psychologists describe this as the burden of silence. In families that emphasize sacrifice and strength, weakness can feel like betrayal. For Elisa, acknowledging her bipolar disorder carried the weight of family secrets and cultural shame. Silence became her armor, but also her prison. Her online presence became an outlet. On Tumblr, Elisa shared fragments of herself, books, music, and private reflections. Some later read like coded cries for help, glimpses of a storm she struggled to contain. There she seemed freer, yet also fragile, a voice echoing into the void. Her trip to Los Angeles was intended as a kind of pilgrimage. She wanted to escape monotony, find renewal, and immerse herself in the pulse of a new city. She believed travel could heal what was fractured inside. But the destination she chose carried shadows of its own. The Cecil Hotel was no ordinary building. Constructed in the 1920s, it bore an infamous reputation for despair and crime. Locals whispered of its haunted aura, a place where ambition collided with ruin. For decades, it housed the marginalized, the homeless, the addicted, the forgotten. Suicides and violent crimes stained its walls. Even serial killers once called it home. To Elisa, the Cecil was simply affordable lodging. To Los Angeles, it was a vessel of trauma. Criminal psychology reminds us that environment shapes vulnerability. Fragile minds can unravel in hostile settings. For Elisa, the Cecil's chaotic energy amplified her risk. A storm meeting, another storm. Philosophy sharpens the weight of her story. The Stoics taught that external events cannot break us unless we allow them entry. But for someone already carrying turbulence within, the boundary between outside chaos and inner storms dissolves. In Elisa's case, the volatile swings of bipolar disorder collided with the Cecil Hotel's infamous atmosphere. Together, they created not just unease, but a fragile crucible where perception, fear, and instability could dangerously converge. Family and friends described her as witty and sensitive, longing for connection, but often misunderstood. In her writings, she spoke of failure, pressure, and drowning in expectation. These are common struggles for young adults. What was uncommon was how her story ended. Her psychological profile is that of a victim, not a criminal. She was not running from law or guilt. She was navigating shadows within herself. She lived in the fragile tension between yearning for freedom and battling illness. That made her profoundly human and profoundly vulnerable. The choice of the Cecil was fateful. Scholars note that locations with dark histories often attract those in crisis. This is not superstition, but a pattern. Vulnerability gravitates toward places where despair already lingers. Elisa did not enter a neutral space. She entered a theater haunted by the past. Here the pattern sharpens. A young woman with unstable mental health traveled alone to a city she barely knew and stayed in a place infamous for tragedy. This was not coincidence, but convergence. Her psyche, her solitude, and her environment aligned like ominous constellations. Silence around her illness deepened the risk. In many cultures, mental health remains taboo. Secrecy magnifies suffering. A hidden illness grows heavier, shaping behavior in ways outsiders rarely perceive. For Elisa, silence was both cultural inheritance and personal burden. Why did she travel alone? For some, solitude is liberation. For Elisa, it may have been a search for identity. But traveling alone with fragile health is dangerous. Isolation magnifies fear. Loneliness grows sharper in unfamiliar spaces where no one is watching and no one intervenes. There is a chilling paradox here. In small towns, murders often stem from intimacy and secrets. In big cities, anonymity can be just as lethal. Elisa, surrounded by millions, remained invisible. Her suffering unfolded in silence, unseen in a crowded world. To understand her vulnerability, one must grasp bipolar disorder. Its cycles of mania and depression are exhausting and dangerous without monitoring. In hotels like the Cecil, no one notices, no one checks in. The condition itself becomes perilous when paired with isolation. The Cecil's environment may have acted as a trigger. Its reputation was not myth but reality. Drugs, crime, despair. For someone vulnerable, such an atmosphere could intensify paranoia or hallucinations. What others found unsettling, Elisa may have found unbearable. The philosopher Kierkegaard wrote that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Elisa had freedom in Los Angeles, but it was untethered, without anchor or safeguard. In a hotel steeped in despair, that dizziness may have spiraled beyond control. She was not the first to suffer there, and not the last. What made her case haunting was how it became public. One piece of footage turned a private tragedy into global obsession. Before reaching that moment, however, we must pause on who she was. Bright, wounded, searching. The small-town murder in the heart of a big city became for her a tragedy without a murderer. Elisa was consumed not by a killer, but by illness, isolation, and an environment hostile to vulnerability. She became a symbol of society's blind spots. Profiling her as a victim reveals patterns: youth, solitude, fragile mental health, unsafe surroundings. To understand her disappearance is not only to follow her last movements, but to recognize the architecture of fragility that shaped her journey. Her background is not mere context. It feels like inevitability. The stage was already set. A young traveler, a haunted hotel, a city indifferent to the vulnerable. The elevator doors would open and close. Cameras would capture what they could, and a story would unfold that no one could stop. The story of Elisa Lam's final days is not marked by violence or confrontation. Instead, it unfolds in fragments: receipts, security footage, eyewitness notes, and most chillingly, silence. A timeline here is more than dates. It is a descent into uncertainty. She arrived in Los Angeles on January 26, 2013. It was to be part of a solo trip across the West Coast, a journey she documented online. At first, her posts carried a sense of delight, observations about cafes, bookstores, and the quirks of city life. Yet beneath her cheerful words, something fragile stirred. On January 28th, Elisa checked into the Cecil Hotel. She was first placed in a shared room, a common arrangement for travelers on a budget. Within days, however, reports emerged of her erratic behavior. Her roommates complained, unnerved by her unpredictability. Hotel staff moved her into a private room, an act that seemed procedural but symbolically marked her shift from connection to solitude, from watchfulness to invisibility. Isolation deepens vulnerability. For someone with bipolar disorder, the move may have signaled more than privacy. It was the beginning of disappearance. In the following days, Elisa visited shops and bookstores. At one, a clerk later remembered her as upbeat and friendly. She appeared like any young traveler, but appearances deceive. Bipolar disorder is known for its sharp swings. Moments of charm can quickly tip into agitation or paranoia. The last confirmed sighting of Elisa was January 31st. That evening, she returned to the Cecil. What followed became one of the most disturbing recordings in modern true crime: the elevator footage. The video opens with her stepping into the elevator wearing a red hoodie and shorts. She presses multiple buttons, almost frantically. The doors remain open. She peeks outside, ducks back in, hides in corners. Her movements are urgent, confused. At times she gestures with her hands as if addressing someone unseen. To some she appeared to be conversing with an invisible figure. To others the motions seemed ritualistic, almost incantatory. The elevator itself acts as a stage. The stubbornly open doors create an unnatural sense of paralysis, as if time was stalled. Elisa seems trapped, not by mechanics, but by something within herself. For forensic psychologists, her gestures and erratic actions align with manic or psychotic episodes. The behaviors suggest paranoia, disorganized thought, and possible hallucination, common in untreated or imbalanced bipolar disorder. Stress, travel, and the Cecil's atmosphere could have exacerbated her condition. For the public, however, the tape became something else. Myth. Millions dissected every frame, claiming signs of possession, pursuit, or supernatural influence. The impossibility of the elevator doors lingering open fueled conspiracies. Rational explanations exist, but the uncanny effect endures. After that night, Elisa was never seen alive again. Her sudden disappearance became a void the city could not ignore. Days passed with unanswered questions, her bed untouched, her belongings left behind, her digital voice falling silent. Each hour widened the gap between routine absence and looming dread. For friends and family, hope flickered against mounting unease. For the Cecil Hotel, it was another shadow in its long corridor of tragedies. What began as a journey of discovery had slipped into silence. Nearly 3 weeks passed before answers surfaced. Guests began to complain of water pressure, discoloration, and foul taste from the taps. Maintenance staff climbed to the roof on February 19th to inspect the water tanks. Inside one, they found Elisa's body. The discovery horrified because of context. A missing girl was not simply found dead, she was found in the very water that sustained hundreds of guests. The image alone of her floating in the darkness of the tank turned private tragedy into communal nightmare. From a timeline perspective, the gap between January 31 and February 19th is haunting. Was she in the tank the entire time? Did she wander the hotel for days, unseen? The silence of those missing weeks is itself a clue, though one without resolution. The water tanks were not easily accessible. To reach them required bypassing locked and alarmed doors, then climbing a ladder. The lids were heavy. Police stated it was physically possible she entered on her own. But doubts linger. Could she, in the throes of psychological disarray, manage it without help? Speculation fractures the timeline. If she climbed in alone, the narrative bends toward accident or suicide. If someone else placed her there, it suggests homicide. Yet the autopsy revealed no trauma, no drugs beyond her medication. Each theory falters under scrutiny, leaving more questions than answers. Witnesses were absent. In a building filled with tenants, no one reported seeing her after January 31st. Did she vanish into hidden spaces? Did she remain unnoticed on the roof? Or did the Cecil's long shadow simply absorb her, as it had others before her? Psychologically, the elevator episode may have been the crescendo of mania. Paranoia and hallucinations can generate overwhelming sensations of being pursued. To step into the tank could have seemed like escape, refuge from an imagined threat. Criminologically, the mysteries persist. Why did the elevator fail at that precise moment? Why did rooftop alarms not sound? Why did it take weeks for investigators to search the tanks, despite guest complaints? These questions fracture the timeline into a spiral of oversight and ambiguity. The murder timeline, if one exists, is incomplete. There is no final confrontation, no evidence of struggle, only silence, followed by discovery. Elisa's last appearance in the video became more than documentation. It became legend. The internet projected fears, fantasies, and theories onto her every gesture. The tape was a mirror, reflecting viewers' imaginations as much as her reality. The true twist is not a revelation, but its absence. No arrest, no confession, no clear cause. Just a body in a tank, and a haunting set of images that resist resolution. In the end, the timeline reduces to paradox. The facts are brutally simple. A woman disappeared, and weeks later, she was found. Yet the symbolic weight transforms simplicity into complexity. It is a crime story without a criminal, a disappearance without clarity. The descent of Elisa Lam remains frozen between the ordinary and the extraordinary, unfinished even in death. The discovery of Elisa Lam's body forced the Los Angeles Police Department into the spotlight. What began as a missing person case escalated into a global spectacle. Investigators faced not only the technical challenge of explaining her death, but the social pressure of millions demanding answers. Their response revealed both diligence and failure. In the early days, the police canvassed the hotel, questioned staff and guests, and searched hallways. Yet critical oversights occurred. They reportedly failed to secure the rooftop immediately, a delay that would later allow endless speculation. Evidence ignored becomes fuel for theories, and in this case, every omission grew into a wildfire of suspicion. The release of the elevator video was intended to generate leads. Instead, it ignited a media frenzy. Within days, the footage went viral, shared across platforms, dissected in forums, replayed on news broadcasts. Millions of viewers became armchair detectives, projecting their fears and beliefs onto the haunting movements of a young woman. This reaction reflects a striking modern phenomenon, the collective obsession with surveillance footage. When context is absent, the human mind rushes to fill the void with invention. Viewers projected fears onto Elisa's gestures, interpreting them as signs of stalking, ritual, or possession. What law enforcement regarded as evidence became, for the public, a mirror for imagination, transforming fact into myth. Traditional media amplified this distortion. Headlines presented her death as both mystery and horror, feeding the audience's hunger for spectacle. The Cecil Hotel's sinister reputation became irresistible material. Journalists unearthed its history of suicides, unsolved murders, and serial killers who once lived within its walls, fusing Elisa's tragedy to a century of darkness. In this telling, she was no longer one victim but another chapter in a cursed building story. Public fascination soon blurred into paranoia. Online communities dissected every clue, accusing staff of conspiracy, guests of hidden violence, or unseen spirits of influence. Rational inquiry drowned in noise. The autopsy, showing no trauma and only therapeutic medication levels, suggested accident to psychologists, but to others it deepened the sense of cover-up. Police theories shifted uncomfortably between accident and foul play. On one hand, they argued that Elisa likely entered the tank herself, disoriented and unstable. On the other, they could not fully explain how she bypassed secured areas. The contradictions in official statements deepened public distrust, feeding the narrative that crucial truths were being hidden. The investigation underscored the limitations of law enforcement when confronted with mental health crises. Detectives are trained to pursue suspects, reconstruct timelines, and establish motive. They are not trained to interpret manic episodes or hallucinations. When behavior slips outside rational frameworks, the investigative machinery falters. Elisa's case offered no clear perpetrator, leaving authorities stranded between procedure and the ambiguity of psychology. From a broader lens, the case became a mirror of cultural unease, our anxieties about safety, surveillance, and mental illness. The public demanded certainty, but certainty was elusive. In its absence, conspiracy theories flourished. Some accused the LAPD of incompetence, others of active concealment. Mistrust of institutions found new energy in a society already skeptical of authority. The internet magnified every detail. Platforms like YouTube, Reddit, and Twitter transformed the investigation into an open-source mystery. Amateur sleuths became commentators, analysts, and narrators, blurring the line between information and imagination. One of the darkest moments came when a musician, once a guest at the Cecil, was scapegoated. His aesthetic became evidence, revealing the mob psychology of misplaced guilt. This scapegoating reflects a deep human need to assign blame. When mysteries remain unresolved, the psyche craves closure. Someone must be responsible. Someone must bear the weight of uncertainty. The misdirected rage against an innocent man underscored how fragile truth becomes when the crowd hungers for certainty at any cost. The Cecil itself became a character in the investigation. Journalists highlighted its history of violence as though its walls conspired in Elisa's death. Sociologists later observed that the hotel's reputation acted as a psychological anchor, shaping how the public interpreted events. The crime scene was not just physical, but symbolic. As days turned into weeks, official explanations hardened into the narrative of accidental death. The coroner ruled the cause as drowning, with bipolar disorder as a significant factor. But the public remained unconvinced. Theories multiplied: secret government experiments, hidden predators, even connections to unsolved crimes in Los Angeles. Each gap in data became fertile soil. For criminologists, the case illustrates how incomplete investigations create ripple effects beyond the courtroom. The absence of definitive answers corrodes trust, fuels folklore, and transforms tragedy into spectacle. Elisa's death was not simply investigated, it was consumed, dissected, and distorted by a culture both fascinated and horrified by the unknown. Psychologists point to a broader cultural pathology. We live in an era of constant visibility, where surveillance promises safety, yet delivers new fears. The elevator footage was supposed to provide clarity, but instead magnified ambiguity. Our collective psyche recoils from not knowing, and so it invents monsters in the gaps. The LAPD eventually closed the case, but the closure felt hollow. The public was not satisfied, because closure requires narrative coherence. Elisa's story had no neat resolution, no identifiable villain, no confession. In the absence of answers, the silence became unbearable. And so theories became louder than truth. The public reaction to Elisa Lam's death reveals something unsettling about us. We are less interested in justice than in narrative. We crave stories that fit arcs we recognize: predator and prey, victim and villain. When reality refuses to fit those arcs, we reshape it. In doing so, we risk betraying the real victim. What remains, then, is a dual tragedy. The first is the loss of Elisa Lam, a young woman who sought freedom but found death. The second is the distortion of her memory by a culture that transformed her suffering into entertainment. The investigation became less about her life and more about our fears. As we close this section, the unanswered questions linger. Did law enforcement fail to protect, or were they powerless against the randomness of mental illness? Did the media exploit tragedy, or merely reflect society's hunger for darkness? Was the public searching for justice, or just for stories that would never end? Elisa Lam's death invites not only forensic scrutiny, but also psychological interpretation. If no killer existed, then perhaps the true adversary lived within. Her struggle with bipolar disorder reframes the story, not as a murder, but as the collision of mental illness with isolation, stigma, and environment. True crime often centers on the killer's mindset. Here, the absence of a perpetrator forces an inversion. What does vulnerability itself look like? What psychological forces create danger without a predator? This shift turns the case into an exploration of fragility rather than malice. Psychiatrically, Elisa's elevator behavior is telling: pressing multiple buttons, hiding in corners, gesturing at unseen presences, all align with manic or psychotic symptoms. These were not random gestures, but coded expressions of a mind fraying under pressure. Actions shaped by a reality only she perceived. Bipolar mania often involves racing thoughts, paranoia, even hallucinations. Decisions feel urgent, even when irrational. To outsiders, the behavior looks bizarre. To the sufferer, it feels like survival. The mind manufactures threats, and the body reacts as though truly hunted. Her vulnerability was compounded by trauma. Elisa carried the weight of stigma, family pressure, and harsh self-criticism. Trauma psychology teaches that suppressed shame and silence amplify breakdowns. The elevator footage may represent not only mania, but the eruption of years of hidden pain. Philosophy deepens this reflection. In Buddhist thought, suffering arises from attachment, to expectations, to identity, to control. Elisa's life shows the torment of attachment, to cultural approval, to academic success, to the fantasy of escape through travel. When attachments failed, her suffering magnified. The untethered mind spiraled toward collapse. The Stoics, too, warned of perception shaping reality. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. In mania, thoughts darken, distort, and multiply. The soul takes on paranoia's shade. The elevator doors became not simple malfunctions, but barriers closing in. Perception itself became prison. Why enter the water tank? Trauma psychology offers one interpretation: refuge. Hallucinations can transform small, enclosed spaces into sanctuaries from imagined pursuers. The rooftop, the ladder, the tank all may have seemed protective in the disordered logic of a desperate mind. Still, alternative theories remain. Some argue the Cecil's failures, unlocked doors, silent alarms, made foul play possible. An opportunistic predator could have acted within the chaos, yet the absence of trauma or foreign substances leaves this unproven, an open possibility rather than a resolution. The aftermath highlights another psychology, our own. Why did millions obsess over this case? Why did the footage fuel endless interpretations? Projection offers an answer. Viewers saw their own fears in Elisa's confusion. Fear of losing control, of being unseen, of vanishing without explanation. Carl Jung called the shadow the hidden self we refuse to face. In Elisa's video, the public confronted its shadow: mental illness, loneliness, the fragility of safety. Many displaced these truths into conspiracies or ghost stories. The real mystery was not outside, but inside us. Cultural voyeurism added another layer. Elisa's final moments became spectacle, replayed endlessly. What should have remained private suffering was consumed as entertainment. This reflects a darker impulse, to transform trauma into narrative, silence into spectacle. Society, in consuming her story, enacted its own form of violence. Religious frameworks add further resonance. In Christianity, the story mirrors the parable of the lost lamb, the unseen individual whose absence is realized too late. Confucian ethics highlight society's failure to protect the vulnerable, a collapse of collective duty. Across traditions, the tragedy reflects systemic blindness more than individual fate. Unresolved questions remain. Could her death have been prevented? Different medication, closer monitoring, or the presence of companions might have altered the outcome. Or was it inevitable, a convergence of fragility and darkness too strong to resist? The silence of the tank offers no answer, only the weight of inevitability. The Cecil Hotel itself becomes metaphor. It symbolizes society's shadow, a place for the marginalized, the invisible, the unwanted. Elisa entered this shadow unknowingly. Her vanishing into the tank mirrors how vulnerable lives disappear into society's blind spots, noticed only when tragedy surfaces. Timing sharpens the metaphor. Nearly 3 weeks passed before discovery. Guests unknowingly consumed water drawn from the tank. The image is chilling, the suffering of the unseen literally flowing into daily lives. Even when ignored, the pain of the marginalized touches us all. Forensic psychologists often caution that why they did it is unanswerable. In Elisa's case, the question shifts. Why do we allow the vulnerable to slip into oblivion? Why do institutions and communities fail to build safeguards? Her story becomes less about individual choice, more about collective neglect. Future inquiries might focus not on hidden killers, but on systemic failures. Why was rooftop access unsecured? Why were alarms ineffective? Why did police minimize the role of mental illness early on? These questions redirect blame from mystery to structure. Trauma psychology reminds us that closure is elusive. Survivors and witnesses seek meaning, yet meaning resists clarity. Elisa's case lingers precisely because it denies resolution. The unanswered questions mirror our own fragility, our fear of instability, and the silence that follows every collapse. The echoes continue. Documentaries revisit the case. Online forums revive old theories. The Cecil endures as symbol, yet beneath the noise lies a quieter truth. Elisa was a young woman searching for light, undone by forces both internal and external. Her silence now demands a different listening, one beyond spectacle. Perhaps the final lesson is humility. We long for answers, yet some mysteries resist. We seek villains, yet sometimes the only villain is circumstance. We desire control, but life offers unpredictability. Elisa's case embodies this paradox, leaving us with no certainty, only a heightened awareness of fragility. In the end, the question defies resolution. Was Elisa Lam's death an accident shaped by chance, an illness spiraling beyond control, or a crime hidden in shadows? Perhaps it was none and all at once, a convergence where human vulnerability met the darkness of circumstance. At the bottom of the tank, no clarity awaited. Only silence remained, heavy and unyielding. It does not offer answers, only reflection, an echo reminding us of life's fragility and the mysteries we cannot master. If fear is a mirror, then Elisa Lam's story reflects not only her suffering but ours. It reflects the way we consume tragedy, the way we avoid mental illness, and the way silence becomes more frightening than violence. Her death remains unresolved, suspended between accident, illness, and mystery. For you listening tonight, remember this: some stories do not need resolution to reveal their truth. If you found meaning in this reflection, we invite you to like, share the video, and subscribe to Criminal Mindcast, where silence speaks as loudly as confession. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.
References 1. Los Angeles Times. 2013, The Mysterious Death of Elisa Lam. 2. Ronson, J. 2015. So You've Been Publicly Shamed. Riverhead Books. 3. Stack, P. 2016. Haunted Hotels and Their Dark Secrets. HarperCollins.